This video was brought to you by the wonderful people on screen here who support me over at Patreon. If you want to support this channel and what I do, then please check the link in the description or the link at the end of the video.
The sexual revolution has gone too far. It's time to fight back against transgenderism.
Wait, hold on a second. So you're telling me that being transgender has literally anything to do with sex? Hot take, dude. Hot take. Alrighty, so I figured I'd go ahead and bring a guest on with me to dismantle what is called 10 ways to debunk transgenderism. That's definitely not a loaded video in any way, shape, or form.
Hey everyone, it's Calon here.
Let's go ahead and go over the fan art that is here for this week, and then we will move into the video proper. So first of all, we have a furry version of my avatar with the This Is Very H from my streams from Safwolf. And then we have me with more cats than I actually own by Unluckypox. And then finally, we have another version of my avatar from Wimbologist. As always, thank you guys for your submissions, and we will go ahead and get right into the video.
It's pretty crazy, but I can go to any liberal campus and claim that I'm a woman, and students would agree with me. But if I were to go to a campus with a banner saying God created them male and female, and distribute flyers against the evils of transgenderism, I would get a pretty negative response.
Well, yeah, and there's a reason for that. When you're talking about somebody's gender, I have no way of understanding what your identity is outside of the information you give me. If you tell me your pronouns are she, her, and you say you want to be known as a female, I'm going to take you at that on face value, because I literally don't have a horse in the race of telling you otherwise. However, when you distribute a pamphlet on a campus telling everybody that they're going to, burn in hell for the crime of existing, then yeah, we might actually find ourselves ideologically opposed. Whereas the other issue is one about common decency.
My take is I don't know if I would actually believe him. I would probably believe that he was some conservative nut job, because generally there are associated behaviors when you come out as trans on a college campus, such as you act in a more feminine way. And this is hard to explain. So for that, I would recommend seeing the study Doing Gender, where they interview a trans girl named Agnes. But I think the funniest part is that is the subtle implication of gender equaling sex here. No one's going to debate you on a college campus about being male or female, and you saying that you're a woman. Those are two completely different things.
Fair, and like I said, most of this is something that's going to boil down to identity when we're having this conversation. But if it's a matter of identity, I can at least take somebody on their word. I can be skeptical. In the case of this guy here, I could definitely see that he's dressed and presented very masculine, so if he's telling me that his pronouns are she, her, I might have some questions. But at the same time, I probably won't ask them, because it's not my business to.
Penn State! We are! Not straight! We are! Penn State! We are! Not straight! We are! Penn State! Equality for all! We love transgender people! Equality for all!
I'm assuming that with the silly music that he's playing in the background here, that he's trying to elicit some sort of emotion, that we should be seeing a protest as silly by merit of it being a protest with an ideology that he doesn't agree to. And then he shows one person being very loud, and apparently we're supposed to gain something from that as well. Though I don't know what point he's trying to get to with this.
I mean, we can do the same with conservatives. That might be fun.
True, I could just show a video of people with tiki torches acting like bumbling idiots and say it made a point for me.
What can you say to these unhinged, screaming liberals? Well, I'm going to give you 10 reasons that totally debunk this transgender madness.
So wait, that person didn't seem unhinged to me. She seemed like she knew exactly what she was saying. So that's just me.
No, it's not just you. Again, I could go ahead and play the unhinged rhetoric for people playing with tiki torches like they're a bunch of children at the Unite the Right rally. Like, that's a thing I could do. Regardless of that, I don't see anything unhinged here. Moreover, my other question is, how did you figure out that everyone here was a liberal? Because last I checked, that's a pretty specific political ideology, and there could be all kinds of people in that crowd, but I guess they're all just libs to this guy.
Yeah, I've seen Nazis who claim to actually be in support of LGBT rights. Funny enough, gay Nazis, that's the thing. So you never know. People hold all sorts of contradictory nonsense in their head.
Number 1, Transgenderism is tyrannical.
What?
Ask people on the Discord, and they will tell you that I will weigh that banhammer like a tyrant.
In one sweeping diktat, the Obama administration ordered that all public schools allow members of one biological sex to use the showers, locker rooms, and restrooms of the opposite sex. In one fell swoop, the federal government imposed transgender bathrooms on all schools in the nation. And the states that opposed the measure were threatened with severe penalties, such as the loss of federal funding.
Yeah, so first of all, you were talking about transgenderism, and then you randomly moved into sex? I'm sorry, but these are not the same things. The bathroom changing thing has nothing to do with the person's sex. It has to do with their identity, and in many cases preventing them from experiencing dysphoria for having to go into a bathroom that is not associated with their identity.
So it's not just a matter of gender dysphoria. It's also a fact that when we tend to be in bathrooms of the same quote-unquote sex, we tend to get harassed a whole lot more than if we're in the other.
The other thing that seems to be largely missing from the critique in this video so far is the fact that transgender people were already allowed to go into the bathroom that conformed with their gender identity. The only thing that happened here was that protections were put in place to allow that continued status quo. Nothing actually changed with this legislation.
Right, and the other thing also is that the legislation as it is completely unenforceable. What are you going to have, the penis police?
Number 2, it fuels child abuse. Transgenderism is especially harmful to children.
Before he gets to his point, I just want to make out the fact that he immediately starts playing the sad music when he's talking about child abuse. I sincerely doubt he actually cares about that, but let's continue into his point.
According to the American College of Pediatricians.
So, for those who don't know, this is actually a hate group that managed to get a hold of a very legit sounding name. Like, these people, from what I recall, are actually associated with the American Family Association. Yeah, they're very much bigots.
And we don't even actually have to go into any type of name throwing in order to show what these guys are. As per the Southern Poverty Law Center, in their own words, homosexual men and women are reported to be promiscuous with serial sex partners, even within what are loosely termed committed relationships. Individuals who practice a homosexual lifestyle are more likely than heterosexuals to experience mental illness, substance abuse, suicidal tendencies, and shortened lifespan. The reason that the American College of Pediatricians has this is because they are notoriously anti-LGBTQ. They point out the shortened lifespans directly after talking about suicidal tendencies, almost as if these things are causally linked, and don't even realize that organizations like them are what largely lead to those suicidal tendencies going up statistically. Substance abuse and mental illness end up being results of trauma begotten, again, by institutions like this. So, it's really great that the first place that he goes to for his information is a notoriously biased source against anybody in the GSRM.
I notice it tends to be a common point when they speak out against LGBT rights. They'll say that the problem is intrinsic to being GSRM, not because society hates us, which is just wrong, sociologically speaking.
Conditioning children into believing that a lifetime of chemical and surgical impersonation of the opposite sex is normal and healthful is child abuse.
Actually, it's the reverse. The reverse being that preventing your children from getting on these puberty blockers if they're trans, and forcing them to go through a puberty and watch their body slowly change into a gender they don't want to conform to, that is excruciating and tends to lead to self-harm and even in some cases suicide. So to not have your children on puberty blockers if they're trans is child abuse.
Endorsing gender discordance as normal via public education and legal policies will confuse children and parents, leading more children to present themselves to gender clinics, where they will be given puberty-blocking drugs.
The only real negative effect that I found from puberty-blocking drugs in my research has been that bone density tends to be affected by it. Late-stage puberty affects bone density, and it's not even bone density affected to the point where someone develops osteoporosis. This is arguably a very, very minor side effect to something that can literally prevent someone from becoming suicidal.
Yeah, I would take lesser bone density any day.
This in turn virtually ensures that they will choose a lifetime of carcinogenic and otherwise toxic cross-sex hormones.
I don't recall these being linked at all to cancer, do you?
I haven't seen anything on that, though if somebody has a study that they could link me, I would love to read it over in the comment section. But again, these sex hormones largely are things that your body already produces anyway. So the idea that these are carcinogens in any amount that would actually cause someone to have their life threatened more so than, say, suicide, it is a bit laughable to me.
But, we need big words in order to scare people.
And likely consider unnecessary surgical mutilation of their healthy body parts as young adults.
So I've never liked surgical mutilation as a term for the actual surgery that goes on when somebody is getting gender confirming surgery. That term could be used for literally every type of surgery. I had appendicitis. I had to be mutilated from the inside in order to remove my appendix. That was a barbaric thing. Nobody should have ever come to me with a knife like that. This rhetoric can literally be used for any invasive surgery procedure of any kind. So the hyperbole here is completely unnecessary.
But not even every trans person gets bottom surgery.
I am so tempted to make a joke about conservatives being more concerned with children's genitals than they ought to be.
I think they're more concerned with children's genitals than they are with children's lives.
Also, the idea that puberty blockers virtually ensure that someone will choose a lifetime of being on hormones that will allow them to conform to the identity that they have, as opposed to the identity that's been forced on them, is a bit laughable. While, yes, there is a higher chance that someone who is experiencing dysphoria will end up transitioning, that will happen whether or not they are on puberty blockers. The puberty blockers are not going to change that. All the puberty blockers are going to do is make it so that if they do transition, they will have a smoother time of it.
And, again, they have, 0 side effects.
Number 3, it contradicts biology and science.
Wait, but I thought we were talking about gender, not sex. Because if we're talking about gender, then biology doesn't really factor into this so much.
Gender is a bit of an emergent property, which means that it's a property that comes about via many different factors of social influence. It doesn't really have anything to do with biological characteristics as far as we know. Now, granted, that's not to say that gender isn't biological at all. That is to say it has no effect on the brain, but rather that it's a phenomenon that's largely, if not almost entirely, socialized into you.
Not to mention the idea that because it's an emergent property of the mind, and the mind is largely, from a materialistic view, considered to be something that's purely physical, and then somebody would use that to dial back to this being a biological construct, not a social one. My argument against that, by that metric, any identity that we find ourselves in would then have to be biological. So by that argument, I guess I'm a biological atheist, and by that argument, I guess Calon is a biological pagan. And that sounds absurd, because it is.
Yeah, atheists should never try to convert anyone, really, because we're all biological.
Gender ideology contradicts basic biology. It's incredible. The same progressive movement that once worshipped at the secular altar of science, to the exclusion of God and metaphysics, has turned against its own science is everything dogma.
What the heck does metaphysics have to do with this?
Yeah, metaphysics isn't part of this conversation whatsoever. You can have metaphysics absent of theism.
I mean, the only thing that's metaphysical is saying that gender is an emergent property. An emergent property is technically something that metaphysics deals with.
The actual point he's making here, one, is a straw man, and two, the other issue that I have with it is that if we want to just look at this from a medical lens, we could look at it from a medical lens and see that there's a higher propensity for white matter in the brain of cis females, and there's a high propensity for gray matter in the brain of cis males. And then what we also find is that trans women, or women who were assigned male at birth, also usually have this higher propensity for white matter in the brain, identical to cis women. So it's almost as if there is actually a scientific explanation for certain aspects of people who are transgender. Now, that does not say that that is something that everybody has. That's not saying that everybody is going to have those same issues in the brain, or that everybody is even going to experience dysphoria that leads to this. From a strictly biological standpoint, they don't have any ground to stand on, and that's not even getting into the sociological aspect of it.
It's almost like they're the ones actually contradicting science, and this is all just one huge, massive projection.
Now, all scientific evidence that disproves the transgender narrative is discarded.
Except it's not, because the scientific evidence doesn't disprove it. In fact, actually, there's research in sociology going back several decades. There's research in biology that goes back several decades, where we actually unearthed cadavers of people who identified as trans in their life, and determined that there were biological aspects at play as well. This wasn't just people pretending to be something they weren't. These people were the identity that they ascribed to themselves. These people were what they said they were. They weren't just living some fantasy. These people existed. I'm sorry if that's uncomfortable for you, but some chicks have dicks.
No, we can't have that in our religion.
We can't have that in our conservative Christian Minecraft server.
No, this is a Christian video for Christian.
Again, the American College of Pediatricians is clear. Human sexuality is an objective biological binary trait. XY and XX.
Oh, we're getting into chromosomes. Oh, I love this argument. So, the only options are XX and XY? So we're just going to ignore Klinefelter syndrome then, right?
Down syndrome, not a thing.
We're going to ignore the fact that people can actually have multiple markers that do not denote their actual phenotypical sex. There are people who have XX chromosomes but do not have a gonadal expression or a genitalia expression that matches with their chromosomal expression. Sex is more complicated than just chromosomes. Chromosomes are one of 5 things that we use when determining sex alone. And again, we're not even talking about gender here. We are simply talking about sex. We look at phenotypical expression, we look at chromosomal expression, gametal expression, gonadal expression, and genitalia expression. These are 5 things. But I'm sorry, that's really complicated?
It is. It's not for us Christians here.
The American College of Pediatricians doesn't want to give you really complicated information. They want bite-sized lies for you to just dig in on.
Are genetic markers of health, not genetic markers of a disorder.
Okay. Nobody said that the chromosomes there were a genetic marker of health or a disorder. It just has to do with sex.
The norm for human design is to be conceived, either male or female. Human sexuality is binary by design, with the obvious purpose being the reproduction and flourishing of our species. This principle is self-evident.
The first issue I have here is the word design. First of all, if we're talking about biology and we're talking about science, science assumes a position of methodological naturalism. So the idea that something is designed is going to largely be discarded, but they're appealing to the American College of Pediatricians for its scientific purview, for its ability to communicate these scientific truths to people. And yet we have here a very, strangely, unscientific take. How weird.
I mean, I could even grant them that it is designed, that some god, say, designed it. That doesn't mean necessarily that the god designed it with the intention that they think the god designed it.
True. That would make these people somewhat blasphemous for assuming the intentions of a god. Also, even if we did grant design, that doesn't necessarily mean that in granting design, we say that something only has one purpose. Because my cup is designed to hold soda, but my cup can also be a wonderful weapon as long as I'm willing to club somebody hard enough with it.
No. You see, the cup disappears. It just evaporates whenever you try to hit somebody hard with it.
Oh yes, if I try to use it for anything outside of its deontological prescribed purpose, it turns into Schrodinger's cup.
Exactly. You got it. We're becoming a good Christian channel now.
Number 4. Biological sex cannot change.
Those who embrace the transgender ideology pretend that men can morph into women or that women can morph into men, but their claim is false.
It is physiologically impossible to change a person's sex.
So that's actually becoming more and more wrong. as our medical technology improves and hormones simply make transition a very non-complicated process. But I think the main point to emphasize here, though, is that it's not a man becoming a woman. It's a woman who's always been a woman.
We also have to point out that there's a equivocation fallacy that's being used over and over and over again. They're specifically using the term transgender, and they're using it deliberately. So we know that they are talking about people who are not cisgender. They are people who have a different gender than they were assigned at birth. But then they keep on dialing it back to biological sex. Sex and gender are not the same thing. Sex has to do with the biological characteristics. Again, I will lay them out one more time. Your sex is a combination of the expression of 5 factors. Your phenotypical expression, your gonadal expression, your chromosomal expression, your gametal expression, and then your genitalia expression. These 5 factors factor into sex. None of them factor into identity, because gender has to do with identity, because what we identify as has to do with the sociologically constructed things around us. I can't identify as a Christian unless something has been constructed socially around me that gives me a point of reference for whether or not I'm a Christian. I can't identify as an atheist unless there's something constructed around me that gives me the ability to determine, via comparison, that I'm an atheist. These are all socially constructed things, and so they operate like socially constructed things. That's how gender works.
That's right, guys. Without us theists, you atheists wouldn't exist.
I think Richard Dawkins literally said as much in his book.
Since the sex of each individual is encoded in the genes. XX if female, XY if male.
Klinefelters if want to confuse conservatives.
Surgery can only create the appearance of the other sex.
You mean the phenotypical expression? You mean like the genitalia expression?
Explains Dr. Richard P. Fitzgibbons, MD, Philip M. Sutton, PhD, and Dale O'Leary in a well-documented study.
A well-documented study that is conspicuously not linked in their description.
Of course, we can't have people looking too deeply into this now can we?
Nope, we have to have our attributions to the music that we use, but not the research that we grabbed. Because that's how capitalism works, everybody. We have to acknowledge that copyright before we acknowledge any work that somebody actually put into something.
That's right, and especially when it comes into inconvenient truths that you might actually accidentally discover, we can't have that on this nice Christian channel.
Every single cell in our body is stamped with our biological sex, and nothing can change that
Watch me.
reality.
Number 5. It warps manhood and womanhood.
How does it warp manhood and womanhood? As far as I can tell, those are things that are constructed, and the only person warping them is you. They were always fairly flexible. Masculinity and femininity were things that we constructed pretty malleably up until this point.
But they're also different across cultures. Like, there are cultures in which what we consider manly is considered feminine, womanly, and what's considered womanly is considered manly. There are even cultures in which there's a third and a fourth gender. I think, in Indonesia, there are 6 recognized genders among this particular tribe. Kind of limiting your worldview here, eh?
It's bizarre, but transgender ideology claims that biological reality does not determine one's sex.
No, that's not the case. If that were the case, then HRT wouldn't exist, and surgical procedures to change that biological reality wouldn't exist. Biological reality is something that is frequently changed. Again, the reality of the situation right now is that I have a cup in my hand, but that reality can change if I hit it hard enough against my desk. I will no longer have a cup. I will have a shattered mess of plastic and glass.
Of course, that's what Suris says, but we all know it will just instantly evaporate into nothingness.
Feelings do. Therefore, the differences between male and female, much like the clothing we wear, are separate from our identity and are constantly in flux.
Actually, no. Your clothing has a lot to do with your identity. Like, think about this. Would you like to wear a dress right now? I'm going...
Totally.
I know that you would, Calon. That's not my point. My point is that I would assume that this person here would not want to wear a dress, because wearing a dress would come in conflict with their identity. They identify as a male, they identify as masculine, therefore things that are identifiably feminine, per our own social construction, would be considered a faux pas for him to wear. These things are not separate, they are intrinsic. Why do you think that many people who are non-binary typically wear androgynous clothing and make it so that it is hard to actually tell what gender they identify as, if they identify with either gender at all? Why do you think people who identify as female typically dress in female clothing? These things are not separate from our identities. They are part of them.
They're actually the core of our identities, through which we tend to judge every other standard by implicitly.
It is almost as if the way you present yourself to everybody else is the lens through which you want them to view your own personal identity.
Yeah, almost, but not quite. Because, we're all good Christians here.
Manhood and womanhood are just labels.
Feminist ideologue, lesbian, and writer Simone de Beauvoir affirmed that one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. The point
Right.
of feminism.
This is a cornerstone of existentialist thought here as well. We discover ourselves after we are born, not the other way around. You are not born a woman, but you find out that you are a woman.
These are things that have to do with one's identity. I identify as a gamer. I was not born a gamer. I did not pop out and immediately have a controller in my hands and start playing video games and said, yes, mommy, cut the umbilical cord. I've got a new cord now. Okay, continue.
Actually, that is how Suris was born. He just doesn't remember it.
The whole point of feminism is not so much to eliminate the so-called oppressive male class, but to abolish every difference between the sexes.
No, that actually has nothing to do with feminism. Feminism has to do with equality. You're confusing feminism with intersectionality.
Which, granted, abolishing differences between the sexes is actually not a bad take. It's more complicated than that, and even intersectionality itself, with intermeshing identities and whatnot, is also a far more complicated subject, but this is way beyond what this guy could understand.
Here we see how the homosexual transgender and feminist movements are allied.
Wait, the homosexual transgender movement? Does he not understand that, after the Stonewall riots, there were several people in the LGBTQ community that tried to remove trans people from the community because they considered them not part of the same movement?
Yeah, does he not realize that radical feminists, that TERFs exist? The trans-exclusionary radical feminists exist?
It's almost as if these are all just really badly informed hot takes that completely ignore any of the history for any of these movements.
Almost, but remember, it's all in the Lord's name.
They share the same final goal, the destruction of male and female.
Wait. So you're telling me that someone who is female to male transgender, assigned female at birth but identifies as male, wants to destroy maleness, even though they are trying to achieve more masculine traits in order to be perceived and feel less dysphoric in being more male? They're trying to destroy maleness. You're going to try to tell me, for some reason, that a homosexual male is trying to destroy maleness. The only thing he's trying to destroy, if he's a top at least, is another male's anus.
If I had given him any benefit of the doubt to begin with, it was gone by this point.
Manhood and womanhood. Number 6, it destroys reason.
Part of logic and reason is the idea that things do have a purpose.
Logic has nothing to do with the actual claims itself. It deals with how claims are structured, which one infers the other.
Not to mention, logic and reason do not have to do with things having purpose. Imbued purpose is something that you would find in a deontological worldview, for instance. That is not something that necessarily comes from logic in and of itself. There are schools of logic that imbue purpose into things, and there are schools of logic that don't imbue purpose into things. Nihilism would be a good example of this.
Exactly. I think what he means here, though, is that he knows he's speaking to a Christian audience. So, by reason, he means God's purpose.
Well, last I checked, God fucked over the human race incredibly hard when he flooded everyone, which means he simultaneously made all of the women incredibly wet while also fucking over all the men and the women. God is incredibly pansexual.
The purpose of our eyes is to allow us to see. The wings of a bald eagle, for example, provide it with flight.
I wonder if he understands that wings on birds, evolutionarily, were not originally purposed for flight. They were purposed for warming eggs and protecting them from the weather. It just so happened that as they evolved, they also managed to work very well for flight. But if you look at flightless birds, they have wings, and they cannot fly. Wings are not strictly meant for flying.
Penguin wings are meant for swimming.
Our lungs exist in order to let us breathe and absorb oxygen, and our ears give us hearing. Likewise, the primary purpose of human sexuality is procreation.
And I have a problem with this. Again, this is more evidence that this is coming from more of a deontological position, where purpose is being imbued onto actions, as opposed to individuals imbuing purpose into their actions. But let me ask you something. How often in the year can sex lead to procreation? How often in any given year someone can conceive? There must be some other purpose to sex over and above that it is used for infinitely more often. Oh, possibly pleasure, perhaps bonding. These are things.
No, this is a Christian religion. We don't have happiness here.
However, transgenderism, like homosexuality and feminism, deny this principle.
Homosexualism, transgenderism, and heterosexualism. You know, I'm starting to find that it's kind of absurd to place an ism at the end of all of these.
And therefore attack human reason itself. But to attack human reason itself is really a form of deliberate madness.
I would say that there is a form of deliberate madness here. I think that watching this video is slowly causing me to become mad, and I'm deliberately watching the video. And I'm not mad because I'm angry, I'm just disappointed. And it's in that disappointment that I think I'm staring into the abyss.
That's a pretty abyss, isn't it?
I'm starting to find beauty in it, and I think that's the problem.
It's crazy.
Number 7. Transgenderism is self-destructive.
The homosexual movement shatters lives. Regret, despair, and suicide.
We keep jumping between the homosexual movement and transgenderism.
Yeah, I thought we were talking about transgender people. Why are we talking about homosexual people now? We were talking about trans folk.
Apparently the whole thing is that we're just a bunch of cross-dressers, and so that immediately makes us gay somehow.
And you know what? I can do that too. Hey, all Christians are death cultists. All of them. And now, I'm going to have people in my comment section that are going to argue against that point. But it's no different than the point that my interlocutor's making here. My interlocutor that's really not much of an interlocutor. It's a video. This is all theater.
Are common among those who adopt the T of the LGBT lifestyle.
Walt Heyer, a man who regrets having lived like a woman for many years, said, "I knew I wasn't a real woman, no matter what my identification document said."
So, Calon, what do you know about Walt Heyer?
To me, he seems like a grifter. He was apparently someone who had regret after surgery, but he's also apparently an extreme Christian. So, no bias there at all.
Could it be possible that some of this regret was imposed on him?
It could be, but for that, I would have to care to actually look more into this guy.
Moreover, it seems like this is what we would expect, right? That there are a few, and there really are only a few outliers of people who get gender reassignment surgery and then regret it and then realize that, oh, wait a minute, I wasn't actually the gender that I thought I was. I think this comes down more to a lack of education, where if people were actually educated on transgender issues and understood them a little better, then they would have more information going in to know whether or not they wanted to actually get surgery. In fact, I know several transgender people who do not want to get surgery. They are actually comfortable with just hormones. That's all that it takes for them to actually be comfortable in their own bodies. Almost as if they were educated enough on this to make a decision that helped them understand who they are. Something that Walt Heyer probably could have benefited from.
Well, here's the other thing. Walt Heyer also has a published book, and it's called Sex Change. It's suicide. A whistleblower speaks out. So, yeah, that's the kind of person we're dealing with.
So he's actually profiting off this decision now. Excellent.
It was obviously a masquerade. Transgenders not only annihilate their birth identity, they destroy everyone and everything in their wake.
Calon, I have a question.
Yeah?
You're a transgender, correct?
I'm a transgenderist.
So does that mean you're a kaiju, destroying everyone and everything in your wake?
Have you seen the trail of bodies and sheer cities that I've leveled?
I haven't.
I actually apparently have godlike powers according to this guy. Bow before me.
Moreover, there are aspects of our identity which we annihilate as we grow up. I used to be a Christian. I am now an atheist. That Christian part of my identity was annihilated. it's gone.
Speaking from a trans perspective, it's a little unfair to say that we are annihilating our own identity.
It's more that you're becoming comfortable in the one that you've always had.
That's what it is. We're not annihilating anything. We're growing into it and actually being permitted to express it. It's really indescribable how much better things get when you can actually express yourself.
Family, wife, children, brothers or sisters, and career.
So, you know what happens when you're transgender and you lose your career? A lot of times it happens because your boss was probably some form of either bigot or somebody who was so ill-informed that they decided that they had to take action against you. That doesn't mean that it was your fault for existing as someone who's trans for losing your career. That's your boss's fault. That's on them.
And this guy's contributing to that, by the way. He's contributing to us getting fired by spreading this misinformation out there.
Certainly, this demonstrates the behavior of someone hell-bent on total self-destruction and self-harm.
Totally 100% certain. This guy, no need for statistics, no need for data. It's certain. It's a deductive truth.
We have one anecdote, and that is all we need.
Exactly. There's nothing wrong with that reasoning at all.
Number 8. Where will transgenderism lead us? Trans species?
If I could be trans species to a lobster, because a lobster, they technically have biological immortality. So if I could then, like, let's say, transform into a lobster, live another 120 years, and then transfer back into a human, is that something I can do now?
I kind of wish that we could. The idea that this leads into trans speciesism is laughable. There are some people who are outliers whose identities are actually attached to species that they are not a part of. But much like with the example that our lovely conservative Christian has given here, they are such an outlier that they are insignificant to the data. So your point about somebody who regretted being trans, regretted going into surgery, is equally invalid for the same reasons that any small amount of people who identify as a species they are not part of are invalid to this conversation. They are so statistically insignificant that we cannot actually come to any conclusions as a result of their existence.
Damn it, sirs. I wanted to be a lobster. I wanted to live forever.
I'm sorry, but you can't be a Jordan Petersonite today.
If a man could pretend to be a woman, why can't he also pretend to be non-human?
Again, there are some people
I could be a
who have
lobster.
tried.
Look, I could be a lobster.
This does not mean you get to be a lobster, Calon. You do not get to be a lobster. No. Again, this is a giant slippery slope fallacy. And not to mention that it's actually there's actually a bit of a category error here as well. So the slippery slope is that, well, if the transgenders say that you could be a different gender, then why stop there? Why not go further? Why wouldn't they move into other things? There's a slippery slope.
Maybe there's a god whispering into my ear or something, but in a few moments, he's going to treat women and men as a separate species.
Well, such a relativistic conclusion is regretfully already here. It's called transspecies. It's also known as furries or otherkins.
Okay.
No, that's not how those communities work.
That is not how either of those communities work. Oh my god. So I don't want to get in.
I can be a lobster. See?
So there is a functional part of someone's identity when they are a furry, in some cases, not all cases, that is identified with an animal that they happen to find some significance to. Again, this is not all furries, and this is a small aspect of someone's identity, not unlike how there's a small aspect of my identity, which is a Pokemon fan that plays cards. Like, literally, when someone has a problem with furries, which is essentially just a functional part of someone's identity, not unlike any hobby or anything else, then they're essentially making fun of all hobbies at this point. They're making fun of everything there. So everything this person likes, or loves, or does, has now been thrown under the bus.
I wanted to be a lobster.
No, Calon, you cannot be a lobster.
I wanted to live forever.
People with species identity disorder consider themselves non-human and are also featured at homosexual parades.
You know who else are featured at homosexual parades? People with mustaches and beards. They must be some kind of really weird, right?
We call them Bigfoot.
I think we shouldn't actually even get into the topic of bears in this discussion. That could get really weird for these guys really fast.
Oh yeah, no. Their virgin minds couldn't handle this.
They would be embarrassed by the information.
All right, Suris, you've been canceled for that pun. No.
When feelings replace reality, logic dies. The intellect, the highest part of man, is degraded. Man's animal side rules. And our godless culture pressures us to play along with these depraved fantasies.
Our culture's godless? The last I checked, even though our culture was fairly secular, it's still mostly influenced by Christianity.
To an absurd point. That would be a topic for a whole video in and of itself.
I think that's what this boils down to. Their worldview is so Christian that anything is a threat to it. Anything.
And they just simply don't differentiate between church and state.
And they would probably call me a snowflake, even though they're being the meltiest snowflake of them all.
Just give them 5 minutes at a gay bar, and that would end, I'm sure.
Once these disorders are regarded as normal, what can possibly prevent the unbridled passions from introducing greater forms of depravity?
Can we point out that many of their points have boiled down to some type of veneration of science, and then immediately they start talking about depravity as if science has anything to say about what is or isn't depraved?
You have to understand, this is Christian science.
Number 9. Transgender ideology and religious persecution.
The transgender ideology may spark the worst type of religious persecution because it imposes a perversion of the mind, beginning with small children.
So wait, hold on a second. What you're telling me is that you persecute trans people because you think that they have a mental problem. That's what we're getting here? It's either that, or you're trying to say that transgenderism is a religion that persecutes other people, in which case, bitch, where?
Well, first of all, it has to be a religion. I mean, clearly I'm not a heathen. I follow the religion of transgenderism, and we force all men to become women. Even Suris, right now, you don't even notice it, but your clothes are changing into your shirt is changing into a dress.
So you're saying that all the Rule 63 fan art that's ever been made of me was predictive?
Exactly.
Those who oppose it are targeted by this new religion of equality, which obliges children to attend sensitivity training and gender indoctrination. Indeed, those who cheer the homosexual movement, whether they like it or not, are de facto servants of a new religion. Its doctrine? Transgender ideology.
So you're saying that TERFs, who are feminists, who you've lumped in with transgender people, follow transgender ideology. So homosexual people who are not trans, they're cis, follow transgender ideology. All of this is just transgender ideology. This is an absurd argument.
I'm not sure how many more bullets they can bite here, to be honest.
It's false god, radical equality, and reckless liberalism.
Reckless liberalism. Now that's a new type of liberalism I haven't heard of.
Yeah, not to mention radical equality. I'm sorry, but this is something that's really gets under my skin. Equality is something that you either have or you don't. How do you have radical equality versus just equality? Equality is kind of an all-encompassing thing. If things are equal, then they are. And if they're not, then they're not. The idea that something can be radically equal is either a really bad joke based on 90s lingo, or it's just a really stupid take.
Its ministers, leaders of the homosexual movement.
Can I find these leaders of the homosexual movement? Because, they seem really neat.
They do, but I don't know what they have to do with us trans folk, especially if they're cis.
And its acolytes, liberal media, immoral politicians, and sadly, dissident members of the clergy.
Ooh, dissidents.
What is its inquisition? Anti-discrimination laws that threaten order and peace.
Anti-discrimination laws threaten order and peace. You know what? I'm perfectly okay with that take. You know why? Because I'm willing to take that one and roll with it. You're right. Jim Crow laws, we need those, because the abolition of those...
You're way too modern. Go back to slavery. You need slavery.
Any anti-discrimination laws that allow us to stop people from being slaves, that is horrible, and that will destroy the order of society.
There won't be anything left of America after the slaves are free.
Its excommunication, anyone who speaks the truth is labeled a homophobe or even a transphobe.
Number 10. It offends God.
Wow.
So you're saying that if God wires somebody's brain so that they are trans, and then he can get offended by what he did. I want to make the point that if he's all-knowing, then he knew that someone would be born and would be trans. And that if that offends him, then God is by definition the most melty snowflake of all time, because he's offended by something that he's known for all of eternity. What a fucking baby.
The desire to change one's biological sex not only denies reality, but it also offends God. Nobody is born male or female by chance, but in accordance with the plan of divine providence.
So, for those who are unaware, divine providence is God's intervention in the universe. You know, that thing that, according to them, made everyone? Because if we're talking about that, then that means, again, like I said before, God made someone trans and then chose to be offended by them, like the snowflakiest snowflake of all kind.
Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I dedicated you. A prophet to the nations, I appointed you. God created male and female. Therefore, to intentionally contradict the biological nature of mankind is an act of revolt against our Creator.
Cool. That's fine. I'm an atheist. Tell me why I should care.
I'm a polytheist. Tell me why I should care about your God.
Like, seriously, I'm not saying your God does or doesn't exist. I'm just saying that I don't believe
I'm
in him.
affirming that his God exists. I can grant that his God exists, and I still don't know why I should follow him.
Fair enough. I have no reason to care about what this God says or thinks, especially if, by the verses you pointed out, and like I've said 1,000 times before, this God made the state of affairs as they are and then chose to be offended by them. That's a big oopsie. That's like if I drew on a piece of paper, and I drew it pink, and then I chose to blow a gasket over that.
Charity calls us to help those afflicted or confused about their own sex, not to increase their confusion by offering them a false solution. Charity does not rejoice over wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth.
I like how he treats sex as almost a distinction between two different species.
Yeah, I find that to be a little confusing. I guess that's why they wanted to make the trans species argument earlier, because if you're gonna make an argument that's so bad that the two sexes are seen as thoroughly divided instead of part of, like, a bimodal scale, then it makes sense that they would also think that other thoroughly divided norms could be somehow crossed.
Yeah, I think that might actually probably be a cornerstone of their worldview. God created man and woman. He created fish and cat and whatever. And so what they really do, they don't view women as members of the same species.
Here's a hot take. So, Eve was created through the use of one of Adam's ribs. So this means that somehow Adam was deeper inside Eve than he ever would be before they even had sex.
Therefore, mercy can never stand in opposition to the truth, for only the truth can set you free.
So what can we do to save the family?
Wait. When did the family get marked into this? That's new.
That is new. I mean, I can tell you what helps according to feminist theory. According to feminist theory, it doesn't matter who your family is so long as your family unit is functioning properly. As long as every relationship is nice and healthy. That sounds to me a lot better than whatever this guy is suggesting.
We must follow the angelic example of Saint Michael the Archangel, who said, "No, put on the armor of God, so that you may be able to stand firm against the tactics of the devil. For our struggle is not with flesh and blood, but with the principalities, with the powers, with the world rulers of this present darkness, with the evil spirits in the heavens. Therefore, put on the armor of God, that you may be able to resist on the evil day, and having done everything, to hold your ground."
And we're just going to go ahead and cut off his organ music because he's just going to keep playing it, and it's really annoying. So that was the video, 10 ways to debunk transgenderism, which really weren't debunking anything about transgender people and kind of jumped all over the place. It gish-galloped enough to make Kent Hovind blush. But with that said, that was the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed it, please hit like, please subscribe, and if you guys haven't already, please go check out Calon over on Polyology. And do you have anything else that you want to say, Calon?
Feel free to join the Church of Transgenderism. It's apparently a new thing. Please help us go ahead and get our religious protections to our religious freedom, because that is totally something trans people could use.
And it's apparently a thing, because, remember, folding socks is a religion, guys.
Not collecting stamps is also a religion.
Apparently.